Hello and welcome to this OECD webinar. Today we're going to be discussing teachers and the challenges they face. There's lots of issues to get into, criticisms over salaries and working conditions, high workloads, teacher shortages and much more. So what can be done about this? And can new technologies, digital tools, or perhaps even artificial intelligence be part of the solution? These were just some of the questions discussed at the recent International Summit on the Teaching Profession in Washington, DC, which brought together education ministers and trade union leaders to discuss the big issues that education faces. I'm glad to say I'm joined by a fantastic panel of guests who also attended that summit, so they should be able to give us some insights into what was discussed and the solutions which were proposed. On the panel today, John Bang, Special Consultant from Education International. That is the Global Union Federation of Teacher Trade Unions. Jennifer Hong from the US Education Department's International Affairs Office. Rebecca Peterson, a high school math teacher from Oklahoma, who is also the 2023 US National Teacher of the Year. And last but not least, Andreas Schleicher, the OECD's Director for Education and Skills. Welcome to you all. You can turn your cameras on if you wish. Before we start though, a message to all those who are watching. If you want to get involved, then please do. We want to hear from you. Send in your questions. You can do so with the Q&A function at the bottom of the Zoom page. I can see people are already saying hello from various countries around the world, from Lithuania, from Japan, from London in the UK, and so on. So please send your questions in. You can also join us with questions, that is, via Facebook. Do send them in and we'll try to get through as many as possible. Apologies in advance, I never do get through all of them. Now though, thanks to, let's get things started. And first let's turn over to Andreas, who will give us an overview of some of the issues that were discussed at the International Summit on the teaching profession. Over to you, Andreas.
Thank you so much, Duncan, and it's a pleasure to be here. The Summit of the Teaching Profession every year brings together ministers and union leaders. And you might think, oh, wow, this is a tough combination. But, you know, it's the combination that can make things move forward. And that's really the spirit with which this summit takes place, where countries share their difficulties, but also the experiences they have made. And at the end of the summit, they actually come up with quite concrete commitment of what the teaching profession and governments will do together to address some of the challenges that we discussed. So obviously, you know, in the times in which we live, you know, this is the days of ChatGPT, and at the OECD, we have been tracking the capabilities of artificial intelligence since 2016. And when we gave computers the type of tests that we typically give to students or adults even, we could see, well, you know, technology could get every of the easy tasks right. That's what you would expect. And about, you know, 1 in 5 of the toughest ones. Now, you talk about the complex problem solving tasks and so on. But when we, you know, did that again in 21, you could actually see how rapidly artificial intelligence had encroached on what humans, you know, could do best typically. And then, you know, for 26, this is what we predict. Basically, by that time, we think that, you know, artificial intelligence will get about, you know, 4 out of 5 of the questions right, whereas of the most difficult questions right, whether for humans, you know, we'll probably be more in the realm of 1 in 5 for the adult population in OECD countries. So dramatic progress. And what this really tells us is that the kind of things that are easy to teach, easy to test, have become also easy to digitize, to automate. And that's the context in which, you know, we have to reimagine education and the teaching profession. And the summit did this on 3 topics. It looked at, you know, how can we make education more outward looking, giving students a better understanding of the interconnections in the world? How can we capitalize on the opportunities of the digital world and manage the risks? But very importantly, how can we elevate the status of the teaching profession, making this one of the most attractive choices? And when you think about it, your first thought might go to money. And here you can see, when you see a green bar, this is where teachers are paid really, really well relative to, other people with college degrees. And when the bar goes down, the red side, you can see actually teachers are not competitively paid. And you can see it varies a lot. And you might think, well, if we want to make teaching more attractive, let's pay people more. But, you can see Luxembourg, that pays its teachers best, is actually suffering from very significant teacher shortages. And you can look at a country like Finland that doesn't pay its teachers particularly well. But you have 10 people lining up for every teaching post. Everybody wants to become a teacher. If you fail to make it into teacher education, they will still accept you in law and economics. So what this really means is that we got to look beyond money when it comes to the attractiveness of the teaching profession. We also see that, the relative salaries of teachers are not so clearly related to whether teachers think that it's been a great choice to become a teacher. Now you can see Korean teachers, are paid well and think teaching has been a great choice. But you can see Portuguese teachers, they're paid well, almost as well as the Koreans, but they think, teaching is a misery. You can see American teachers are not paid well, but most of them say, actually, the advantages of being a teacher clearly outweigh the disadvantage. And you can see French teachers who say, well, we are paid poorly and teaching is a misery. So once again, you cannot explain the attractiveness of the teaching job with money alone. What makes actually a lot more sense is when you look at the status of the teaching profession in society. Now you can see, for example, here, Singapore, Korea, Finland, teachers believe that actually what they do is something that is respected, that is valued in society. On the list down, you can see in Sweden and France and the Slovak Republic, it's less than, 5 in 100 teachers who believe what they do every day is something that society values. What influences this? This is really the key that we need to answer. And to some extent, this has very much to do with what we do to publicly elevate the standing of teachers. It's the kind of systems, the structures, and the support that is being put to this. Now, what we know is that every interaction that teachers have with their communities, with families, now, this is how you build, this is how you bank social capital, the ties and community that build that respect and status. Now. So high-performing education systems where teaching is attractive typically give their teachers plenty of opportunities to interact with parents, to interact with students, to know who they are teaching, who their students are, who they want to become, and how the teachers can accompany them in their journey. They give their teachers real opportunities to be seen in their communities, to make a difference. And they have, when it comes to engagement with parents, often, an asset-driven versus a deficit-driven approach. They talk to families on a regular basis about, how to support their children rather than just when there is a problem that comes up. So that's a really, really key that came up during our discussions, and that's also something that research supports. Second point is really about, what we do to develop effective teachers. Now, what you can see here is that when it comes to sort of general pedagogy, the content knowledge, most teachers get trained in those things, and most teachers actually feel quite competent and prepared for those things. But you can see there are areas, like, for example, the use of technology for teaching, or teaching in multicultural or multilingual settings, where you can see actually, there the bars get a lot shorter. Teachers get no preparation and they feel even less prepared. Now the green bar is even shorter than the blue bar. So that obviously matters, where do we put our effort to help teachers become really great in their different kinds of jobs. And we know that high quality professional development is always ongoing. It happens every day. Great schools are places where everybody learns, not just students, but also teachers. It happens at the front line in the schools, and it's collaborative. One of the insights that we have is that where teachers, are engaged in collaboration and collaborative professional development, you see a greater sense of teacher self-efficacy. You see a greater sense of teacher job satisfaction. And remember, that is, the ultimate key to the attractiveness of the teaching profession. And last but not least, a culture of sharing, a culture of sharing, and where you can see actually on the left side, I compare here the country average with the United States. There's a fair amount of, exchange and coordination going on in most schools, in most systems. But when it comes to the kind of deep professional collaboration on the right side here, you can see that's actually quite rare. And things like classroom observation. Have a look, how other teachers teach those kinds of lessons. Building professional learning communities to share those experiences. There's often little time for this, little opportunity. Those things are actually quite rare. Why do I highlight this? Because our data clearly show that more teachers teach jointly as a team, the more they observe other teachers' classes, the more they engage in joint activities or take part in collaborative professional learning, the greater their sense of self-efficacy, of feeling effective as a teacher. So those things actually really matter. And again, self-efficacy is the key to the attractiveness of the teaching profession. So short story really is not just about money. Money is a great start. Money is always, a negative motivator. Now, if you don't get paid adequately, you're probably not going to be very interested in teaching, but it's not enough to be a positive motivator. You really need to look at those factors of elevating the standing of the teaching profession, giving them attractive career choices and investing in them, and then enabling that culture of collaboration, that culture of sharing. Let me turn to the second topic that we discussed. We live in a very complex world these days. There's nothing simple anymore. Education has created an amazing world around us, but it's also left us with many disconnects in our societies. The disconnect between the infinite growth imperative and the finite resources of our planet. The climate agenda has become urgent for many, many young people. The disconnect between our financial economy and the real economy, between the wealthy and the poor, between what we call our gross domestic product and the well-being of people, between what is technologically possible and the social needs of people, and between, the way we govern ourselves and often the perceived voicelessness of people. So in our PISA assessment of global competency, we looked into those things, and we could actually see, on the one hand, young people, generally think of themselves as a citizen of the world, or looking after the global environment is important to them. At the same time, when you ask them, do you think you can do something about this? Or do you think what you do makes a difference for people in other places? Those bars get much shorter. Now, that's the crux of education today, that we make young people often passive consumers of information about the world, but we don't give them that agency to mobilize their cognitive, social, emotional resources. So what can we do about this? One topic that was quite prominent in our discussions was, languages. Languages, the key to understanding the world, the key to understanding other cultures. And we know a lot about the cognitive benefits. Research tells us, that people who learn more languages are also better in their first language. They have often increased creativity or attention and mental alertness. We also have, even popular newspapers these days talk about, the salary benefits that you get by speaking multiple languages. Those things are all very, very real. But perhaps the most important aspect really is the openness to other cultures, to other ways of thinking. And this is an area we've actually seen some real progress. Now, when you look actually exposure to language learning, you can see in most education system, you discount here, maybe the English speaking world, but in most systems, you can see students speaking at least one more language or two more languages at school. So language learning is something that is a lot more popular now than it used to be. Even, two or more languages is quite common now in schools. If you look, at Europe in 2003, not 20 years ago, you could see that the map was largely red. Now, most kids, when they learned a foreign language, learn it later in school. And we know that's not particularly effective. Languages is a tool that you learn best when you're actually very young. Well, if you look at the picture, in 2016, you can see the map has turned largely blue. Actually, most countries are now teaching kids early on another language. So in a sense, this is a sign of progress, that language learning is becoming more popular And we do see that it makes a difference. Now, PISA data show that speaking 2 or more languages always relates positively to perspective taking, or, also positively to having greater respect for people from other cultures. So that's the language component. But, global competency and openness to the world is about a lot more. And the discussions in our sessions here were actually far more going wider beyond that. It has to do, how do we teach global competency at school? Now, how do we make young people aware of the interconnections? Now, if you drink a cup of coffee in Paris, could you imagine what this makes, or what that impact is on workers in Brazil or Colombia who plant that coffee? Understanding those interconnections and acting on them. And what you can see is, on the one hand, schools learn a lot about cultural perspectives on historical and social events, or, students learn about the cultures through, lessons and so on. That is quite common, quite frequent. But when it comes to real activities, our school offers an exchange program with other schools in other countries. Or, in our school, we celebrate festivities from other cultures. Those things are a lot less frequent, lot less common. Why do I say this? Because our research actually shows that it's not just what you learn, the content, but it's very much the activities in which you engage that drives, student attitudes and behavior. And there's a lot of differences across countries. For example, student exchanges, very common in Singapore, very common in Slovenia. Or, celebrations of cultural festivities. Again, the Singaporeans, but also countries like Panama, like Brazil, do a lot around this. Now, whereas in, Saudi Arabia or Switzerland or Italy, that happens rarely. So you can see actually different countries taking very different approaches to that. And again, here's the data that shows how much of a difference that makes. Where students did more of those kinds of things. They were more interested in learning about other cultures. They were more aware of global issues. They felt a greater agency, sense of, activity regarding global issues, greater sense of self-efficacy, where they greater resilience. So it seems really that those activities are very strong predictors for students' attitudes and behaviors. Now, the question is, of course, how do we, prepare teachers on that? And the first thing that we actually saw is that, well, generally, teachers hold very positive multicultural beliefs. They actually understand the importance of benefiting from cultural diversity in the instructional settings, particularly so in Singapore, in Ireland, in Ukraine. But, when it comes to professional development, actually teaching in a multicultural or multilingual setting was a lot less frequent, was actually not one of the dominant professional development activities. So there is a clear gap between teachers' perceptions of the importance and that being incorporated in today's kind of teacher learning opportunities. So this is an obvious area where we could all do better. And we actually shared some really, really interesting examples. Now, if we want learning that is, holistic, relevant, deep, transformational, we need educators who understand their learners, who engage in global pedagogies, who understand and are willing to actually share their very personal experience with their students and their learners. So that's the second topic. And the third topic was about the digital world. Now, what we very clearly see is that the pandemic has, woken up analog schools to this digital world that is radically transforming learning around us. The biggest, realization has been the personalization of learning. Now, while you study math on a computer, the computer can now figure out how you learn and then make your learning experiences so much more granular, so much more adaptive, so much more interactive. Technology has made learning fun. If you think about, game-based learning activities, virtual reality embeds learners in a 3D world, and augmented reality can super empower the real world, particularly in vocational learning settings, bring, information into what you actually do, and therefore, helping you to actually take, the appropriate action. People still question, and there is some hesitation, should we see robots in a classroom? We could see that at the summit as well. Some countries, don't think that is a great idea, but actually you take something like language learning, it's proved to be quite effective there. Basically, languages you do not learn by having a teacher talking to you about grammar and vocabulary. Languages you learn primarily, particularly at young ages, through talking, through speaking. Now, that's very hard to do in a classroom setting, but with robot tutors, it's possible. Even peer learners, research shows that sometimes you learn better by explaining things to others than having others explaining things to you. And once you get technology, has actually some opportunities there. Perhaps, the biggest gain is by, overcoming this terrible divorce between learning and testing that we currently have. We ask learners to pile up years and years and years of learning, and then one day we call them back and say, tell me everything you know in a very contrived, constrained setting, and we call that an exam. Well, technology allows us to bring those two worlds again together and then use learning analytics to understand how different students learn differently and engage with this. Now, making teachers not just great instructors, but also great data scientists who learn actually from the experiences of other kind of teachers and other classrooms. That's the promise. But, we also looked at the reality. We heard many stories that actually sometimes technology intensity creates issues for students' well-being, for the effectiveness of instructional settings. And actually that is supported by our data. Often we do see that there is a negative correlation between technology intensity and learning outcomes. We need to take that to heart. Take away from this, where teachers are not at the heart of the design of technological solutions, they're really helping with implementation. So basically, again, you're creating an environment where teachers are active in, shaping the pedagogies, the technologies that, shape learning outcomes. Because smart education is not about the devices, about technology. It's always about, the reimagination of what learning, what teaching can be when they are powered by smart technology. And that is, meaning from moving from learning technology to learning activity, making devices more present, more active, but less distracting, less visible. Making sure that artificial intelligence actually empowers learners and teachers and not disempower them. Both is possible. That's really an important realization, that artificial intelligence is not a magic power. It's just a great amplifier, an extraordinary accelerator. It's going to amplify good ideas and good practice in the same way it accelerates poor ideas and bad practice. And that's where the human is so important in this, and that empowering element. So when we talked about what can governments and unions do, well, work together to cultivate a more innovation-friendly ecosystem, right? Working on standards and create a more level playing field. And as we speak, actually Education International, our partner organization, and the OECD for the summit are working together to see, what could those standards really look like? What are the good practices in using technology? Practices that are governed by ethics, by transparency, by data protection, and by also sort of having good regulation on data protection and privacy that focuses on transparent, on explainable, on bias-free, and also applications that are negotiated between the stakeholders, student included. By taking a more strategic approach to funding and procurement, and certainly by investing in capacity. That's really what we can do concretely to make that kind of aspiration possible, to leverage the potential of technology while managing the risks. And the very last point I want to make is really, we're not just using devices for teaching, we need to teach for a digital world. You can see, for example, the share of students who can distinguish fact from opinion, who can navigate complex information. While you can say in Singapore, Korea, parts of China, at least, a good half of young people are ready to do that. But in most countries, actually, the majority of young people have great difficulties. Of course, they can all use their mobile phone, their tablet, but they don't have those navigation skills, that capacity to judge information, triangulate information, to query information. School too often teaches you to learn answers rather than to teach you to ask the right questions and to query information. So you can see we have a very, very long way to go to make that happen. We need to listen to the students who are always the early adopters, support the teachers on this, and also think harder about what public-private partnerships could mean for the protection of education as a public good, and how to build capacity across the system. And that really brings me right to the beginning again of the summit. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Andreas, for that presentation. Obviously, a lot of information there which we can dig into. Let's get right into it. John Bangs from Education International. Why don't we start with you? Andreas obviously outlining a lot of interesting research, including that salaries are not the key to making teaching attractive as a profession all the time anyway. You're representing the unions on this panel. Do you agree with that? And also, what for you is the most pressing issue facing teachers globally today?
Well, Duncan, I thought what been quite good actually in a minute or so, just give you a little bit of background of what the summits actually are. We've had 13 of them. They started in 2011. So based on the principle which our research, but certainly OECD research, which found that actually strong proactive teacher unions were correlated with high performing education systems. And the initiative came from the US. And I want to do a shout out for the United States actually, and Jennifer's here. And also for the other countries that have hosted the summits over the years, but particularly for the US, because they have hosted the summits 4 times. Whereas all the other countries have hosted 1 each. And their commitment, both the Obama and the Biden administrations, has been strong and staunch. I also want to do a shout out to Andreas himself, whose own commitment to what you would call positive pluralistic dialogue between teachers, their unions and employers, and through the OECD, with the OECD, has been staunch as well. And I do think that's really important. And another little thing, and people will be asking, how does this conversation take place? It takes place under what's called the Chatham House rule, where within the forum, where there's discussions taking place, you don't identify the speaker, you don't identify the country, but you can actually pick up on the themes. So I just want to pick up one of your themes. You asked me about Andreas's analysis of the relation of pay. I'll tell you what really got to me over the last 2 or 3 summits, particularly Spain, previously to that, the first digital, because of COVID, the first digital US in 2021, and this one, is that actually there's a total understanding about the need to teach the whole child, which includes social and emotional skills, and therefore to actually address the issue of the whole teacher. And Andreas is right, there are issues around issues of social prestige, unreasonable workloads, etc., etc. The solutions are there. That's focusing on teacher self-efficacy, and I absolutely agree with him on that. Professional development in the widest sense, that's development as a teacher right the way through their professional lives. But pay is quite interesting within that context, and I think that's part of the whole teacher concept actually. And I think where and there is a contributing factor to attrition, if particularly, and this is in my reading of OECD evidence, the relativities between teachers' pay and other equivalent professions in a country are poor, where teachers are paid significantly less than other professions, and that's quite an important finding. I mean, I know the OECD EA Education at a Glance found that actually within OECD countries, there's a difference between 4 and 14% relative bad relativities in relation to other equivalent professions. Now, I just want to pick up some of the points and, in a sense, add to what Andreas was saying. Actually, I thought the first session showed the maturity of the summits. We didn't do show and tell, what I call show and tell, where governments come along and say, this is our wonderful education system. They speak for a long time, then they move on and there's no debate. We absolutely moved in and have done over the last 2 or 3 summits, and particularly here in this summit, to an iterative discussion where people were respectful and it was a genuinely pluralistic discussion on the issue. And that's what affected actually the first session, which was around, in a sense, where are our teachers now? And people had absolutely internalized the big issues around teacher well-being, etc., etc. The second session,
John, if I could interrupt you there, because on teacher well-being, it is one of the big issues we want to get into. And I
Yeah.
wonder if I can bring in Jennifer Hong from the US
Sure.
Education Department,
Sure.
because from a US government perspective, what are you doing to ensure teacher welfare? And I suppose also, what's the biggest issues you're dealing with on a day-to-day basis?
Thank you, Duncan, and good morning from the United States. I find myself writing furiously whenever Andreas gives a presentation. So the OECD has been a wonderful partner in this and presenting data and cogent analyses. John, it's been a pleasure to work with you and EI, just their analyses of what really works with teachers. And I want to highlight something that that Andreas mentioned about one advantage we have in the United States. And before I get into it, just an honor to be here with Rebecca Peterson, our 2023 National Teacher of the Year. One thing I think that made the ISTP such a smashing success was the fact that we were able to bring in Rebecca and her colleagues from State Teachers of the Year to the first session on elevating and enhancing the teaching profession. So just to highlight, one of the advantages of the US is the teacher belief that they are making a difference, that they are valued. And what we need to do as a society is to elevate that, to enhance that, to elevate teachers' voices. And that's been a major policy priority of this administration. And so we're really proud to have those opportunities. We have invested in addressing critical areas of need for teachers, particularly in mental health and wellness. We know that trickles down to our students. So we've made great investments in developing and advancement of teachers. We want to ensure the collaboration with colleagues that Andreas mentioned is so important for teacher development. We want to elevate through calls to action, spotlight best practices, provide guidance to our communities. We've invested in innovation and research grants to understand what really works with teachers. We want to invest in supporting schools with distributed leadership models to support teacher leadership, and to really provide professional development and opportunities for teacher advancement and leadership.
Okay, great. Well, Jennifer, that's really interesting. And I think it's a perfect opportunity to bring Rebecca in, US National Teacher of the Year, like you say. First of all, as well, congratulations on the accolade. Rebecca, you've been praised for making maths exciting and accessible for your students, as well as the way you support those in your classroom in Oklahoma. So, you know, just mentioned there about the importance of making teachers feel valued and the importance of supporting teachers. Do your colleagues in Oklahoma feel they're getting all the support they need to ensure they make learning as interesting and as engaging as possible for their students?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. It's such an honor to be here and to piggyback off of what Jennifer said. I shared this at the summit, but we all the State Teachers of the Year were honored at the White House a couple of weeks ago, and I got to bring our 7-year-old son, and he told me, you know, Mom, this is a once in a lifetime opportunity for you, but not for me, because I'm going to be a State Teacher of the Year one day too. And he had never talked about being a teacher before seeing us elevated at the White House. And I think that is just a microcosm, right, of what happens when kids see this profession elevated. So to elevate this profession is not just a retainment issue, right? It's about recruiting as well. But to discuss, you know, particularly how my colleagues in Oklahoma are supported, I'd like to push back a little bit on the pay issue. For example, when I came back to Tulsa, my Lyft driver, my Uber driver, offered, you know, he didn't know who I was, what I did, but offered without me asking that he made $68,000 last year. And Oklahoma teachers start at $38,000. And so I think pay is still an issue here in Oklahoma. When we talk to our high school students, they know these numbers, right? They have this information readily accessible. And so they're looking us straight in the eyes and they say, should I really go to school for 4 years and take on debt and be 4 years behind, right? Essentially, and not working when I can make more driving a car or piping line, right? And so these are real conversations we're having about how pay does impact recruiting students into the profession. And so, you know, we as Oklahomans in particular, I think teachers here, we have a lot of resilience and grit, and we are in this profession for the kids. I've traveled all over Oklahoma as Oklahoma Teacher of the Year, and I ask every teacher I interview, like, what is your why? And every single time they come back to the students. And so for us, it's not a matter of, are we tapped into our why or not? It's, are the barriers removed for us in being able to serve our why? And I think we honor, you know, the teaching profession by elevating teachers' inherent creativity. Every single person is creative, like we all daydream, right? But what are we doing to elevate that creativity? You know, what supports are we putting into place to allow teachers to really dream and imagine and create for our students and their families?
Thanks for those insights, Rebecca. And I mean, what a life over the last few weeks for you, from the White House to an OECD webinar. So it's only been up and up for you. Andreas, let me bring you in here because teacher pay has been mentioned again there. And apparently in Oklahoma, you know, Uber taxi drivers earning tens of thousands of more than teachers. And a question or a statement really from one of the viewers, Agan Evazoza, saying that Azerbaijani teachers are complaining about their salaries. Teachers need to feel valued. So I know you've already made this point that salaries are not necessarily the key to making teaching attractive, but certainly it is important. So do countries need to focus on this area more?
Well, some do. I think the United States is a good example. Actually, teacher pay in the United States is way below competitive pay, and it is below what other countries would pay in relative terms. So I do think you can make an argument in a country like the United States. The point I was making is that actually money isn't going to make teaching attractive alone. You can see countries that pay great salaries like Luxembourg, like Germany, where still, you know, the teaching profession is not a popular choice. It's actually, there's big teacher shortages. And I do think we focus too easily as money as a solution to everything. And we forget, you know, the kind of drivers that really make teachers motivated, that give them that sense of, you know, agency, that sense that they can make a difference to the lives of students. Because when you ask teachers in our Thales survey, why did you become a teacher? The number one answer typically is, you know, I want to make a difference to the lives of young people. And I think that's, and often the opportunities for that are too limited. That's really the point. But there's absolutely, in a number of cases, countries, a very clear case for getting teachers adequate pay.
Understood. Well, let's talk about some of the potential solutions to the issues that have been discussed. John Bangs, back to you. What needs to happen to make teaching and learning more effective, to make the teaching profession more attractive, apart from pay?
Well, I think countries have to have systemic teacher policies, which actually look at teacher development in the round. Professional learning and development's been mentioned. The issue of actually empowering teachers, raising levels of self-efficacy and teacher leadership, looking at horizontal routes in the profession, not always going into management. Saying to teachers who are really, really skilled, actually your skills can be used in other schools and your contract allows you to do that within the school day. Advanced skills teachers, if you want to describe them like that. There is a horizontal career route there. And that means actually that teaching professions have to be trusted, and they have to have the institutions which enable them and the contracts which enable them to have the kind of freedom which gives them the confidence that they know that they can actually make a difference. And I agree with everyone. Actually, you go into teaching to make a difference to children's lives, and everything that has to be done, and that's why I talk about the whole teacher as much as the whole child, everything that has to be done to ensure that teachers can do that. And the thing that really struck me at the OECD ministerial conference, actually, which I attended as part of the union delegation, there was a statement there which said that education and schools are basically the structural support for society. I totally agree with that. And if that's the case, then you have to look at how teachers can provide that enormous support and give kids optimism in the future. So I would say the solutions rest in partnership between teachers, their unions and government, and actually a very mature partnership which says we can agree to disagree, but let's look at the areas where we can agree and go forward together on it.
Jennifer Hong, let's come to you on that. Do you agree with what John Bang said there? Is that happening in the US?
It is, Duncan, and I just want to go back to this issue of compensation because that is part of it. We have a competitive job market in the United States, and there's only so much we can expect from our teachers, right? I mean, if we want great educators, other fields are going to want them as well. So we have to make the profession attractive. So compensation goes hand in hand with providing working conditions to make teachers feel valued and to create the space, physical space, intellectual space, collaborative space, so they can flourish as professionals. And compensation goes hand in hand with that. And so as part of our addressing labor shortages and elevating the teaching profession, we have offered guidance along with our partners in the Department of Labor, interagency-wide, to provide information and guidance to school districts to ensure that teachers receive a livable wage. We've also provided guidance on how federal funds can be used at the local level to support educator development and educator compensation. So I can't emphasize enough that this systemic approach that John mentioned is everything. So I will say that part of the complications of the ISDP was the fact that we were working together. We were, we had co-hosts with our partners on the screen right now, and we were working hand in hand with our unions every step of the way. And that work it's not easy, but I will say that doing that work on the front end has paid dividends in terms of how quickly we've been able to respond to the educator shortage. So yes, and yes, I think having a systemic plan, some of our countries mentioned in their commitments about a nationwide plan to support teachers, but also really at the grassroots level, coordinating with the unions and teacher associations. I think that's critical, and it's such a vital part of our democracy. And so we really need to support teachers in that way, put our money where our mouth is.
Thank you, Jennifer. Rebecca, I'm wondering, the teachers at your school in Oklahoma, are they engaging with what's going on at a high political level, or are they too busy with the day job? And from your perspective, what is the main thing you'd like to see policymakers do to change the way that schools are managed?
Yeah, I think, both. It really depends on the margin that you have. And I think that just goes back to what John was saying about it's not just the whole child, it's also the whole teacher, and we know that we need to be trauma informed for our students, but I keep saying, I think it's time we be trauma informed for our teachers as well, because our teachers have held so much, particularly as we've navigated our way through COVID and post-pandemic learning. And, now more than ever, our students deserve nurturing teachers, like teachers who understand the role that connection plays post-pandemic. We know that our students' brains are literally scanning differently post-pandemic. Like, our students have changed, and our teachers have too. And so now more than ever, we really need what I would love to see is policies that really help our students have teachers that understand this role of connection. Because while the science is very sobering in that, yes, our students have changed, the research is also very promising in that the way we heal is through connection, right? And so how do we foster connection? Well, teachers need margin in their day. We need time, we need time to collaborate. We need time to plan. We need time to grade. We need time to be. We know that our best thinking happens when we can just be, right? And yet students and teachers are just kind of go, right? And so we really need we really need policies in place that allow for this margin so that our teachers can better support our students. And we certainly need wraparound supports for our teachers, just like we're asking for wraparound supports for our students. You know, what would it look like to have mental health care professionals on site for our students and for our teachers? How are we removing those barriers for our teachers to access the things we know are going to help us as individuals, help us connect to ourselves so we can connect to our students?
Thanks, Rebecca. Andreas, Rebecca mentioned teacher shortages among a number of other issues there. And there is a question from Susan Luach who asks, could you please address the issue of standardization of teacher qualifications? There are many jobless qualified teachers, she writes, but at the same time, many countries which lack teachers. So are standardized qualifications the answer, I think, is the question.
Yeah, I think actually many countries are experimenting with alternative routes into teaching, and there are good models for that, actually. I mean, if you look at Teach for America, I mean, there are sort of Teach for All. I think there are actually opportunities for that. But the issue of quality is a very important one. At the end of the day, when people, you know, come into teaching through other professions, they still need to be really professional teachers. And so in a way, I think that issue will not go away. And I think that's the tension to reconcile. I would strongly argue in the time in which we live, you know, there should be multiple inroads into teaching, and often, you know, students can benefit from experiencing people who come from other professions, who have other types of experience. But ultimately, the pedagogical skills of teachers are very important, and we need to find ways to recognize them. And that's where, you know, some degree of standardization is important, or at least a qualification framework.
Thank you, Andreas. John Bangs, let's turn back to you. When countries try to enact solutions for education, do you see countries making policy decisions based on evidence all the time, or are policy decisions sometimes not based on evidence necessarily? They're being driven by other factors, such as personal experience or other political reasons?
Yeah, that's a very good question, Duncan, actually. What I love about the summits is that actually the non-evidence-based decisions come under interrogation, which is absolutely excellent. Yes, we do see that all the time. And I do think actually one of the great things about the summits is that it tells countries that they can't do it on their own. They do have to learn from other countries. And the learning takes place in a big way and in an intensive way. And the evidence that the OECD provides, the stuff we bring forward in their own briefing, all the other evidence that colleagues bring to it, actually allows that to happen. And it is actually, the summits are actually a way of militating against ideologically based education reform, as opposed to evidence-based reform based on practice, building on it and looking at new ways of going forward. And I'll give you an example, actually. I did think the digital debate this year was excellent. I thought it was one of the best debates we'd had, actually. And there was a real debate. There were some countries actually saying, oh, why are you getting worried about AI? It's neutral, et cetera, we just have to make it work for us. There are other countries saying that we do need regulation. We do need to actually have a look at protocols. And in fact, actually, the OECD has done some good work on having a look at AI principles. And as Andrea said, we're working on that. So it's a developmental approach, and it's based on evidence. And that, for me, is one of the best things about the summits, is its constant affirmation that you base your policy on evidence rather than ideology.
Thank you so much for that, John. And it's great that you mentioned AI, because I wanted to bring up digitalization and the impacts of new technologies. So straight to you, Jennifer Hong. Should the US be worried about AI and its, well, impact in general, but also on classrooms?
Well, I think we want to be effective with how we use technologies in the classroom. And nowhere has that been more evidence during the time that we were put out because of COVID. We want to make sure our teachers are equipped. We want to make sure that they are informed by evidence-based practice. as John mentioned, and that we're training them on the tools that are most effective for students. So I think, there is always caution that we want to proceed with caution, but we want to proceed with best evidence. Where is AI most effective? And Andreas mentioned in his presentation, well, this might be effective in terms of language learning. At the same time, what makes great educators so effective is the connections that they can make, and that what we can do as policymakers to effectuate those connections, right? To take care of our teachers so that they can take care of our students. So I think striking a balance is really important. But certainly we stand ready and, on listening to our peers and engage in the conversation regarding how AI can best inform educators and the teachers.
Thank you, Jennifer. Rebecca, let's go to you on this then, because you're in the classroom. You potentially are the one who's going to have to be using AI and AI chatbots in the future and who knows what else. Do you, or indeed the teachers you are colleagues with, feel pressured to use new technologies? Is there pushback sometimes to these ideas?
I don't know that I'd say pressured. I agree with Jennifer completely. Like there's always got to be this balance. And I want to tread very lightly when it comes to AI because it's so new. And so, it feels like it is. We're getting new information on it on the daily. But actually, as a math teacher, a form of AI has been out there for a long time, right? Our students can take pictures of a math problem on an app, and then it works the whole problem out for them. And so this is, in a way, a issue that math teachers have been kind of grappling with for 5 or so years. And for me, with technology, it always comes back to how can I harness it to connect even more with my students, right? There's sort of this idea that like technology is so impersonal, but actually I think we can use it for the exact opposite. I think we can actually use it to make education incredibly personalized. And so as we saw that, our students can download these apps where they work the problems for them, we really started having to analyze best teaching practices in the math classrooms, right? And so for me, it has really pushed me to make sure that we are spending math classroom time doing math together. So I'm doing math with them as opposed to doing math at them, right? And it has pushed me to connect with my students on a much deeper level. And I think, we have technology has allowed us to offer safety to our students in a lot of ways as well. And when I can send out a survey of just a mental health check-in, how are you doing? And that is on a screen, there's a bit of safety there, and my students are willing to open up oftentimes more than they would sometimes if I am asking them even to write it on paper and pencil. And so there's so many ways I can see just in the last 5 years where technology has propelled us as teachers to really analyze our teaching practices and to ask our questions, to ask ourselves the question, how can I use this to connect to my students on an even deeper level? And I think it all just comes back to harnessing the power of technology and always, yes, striking this balance, always treading a little bit lightly, but not being afraid of it.
Thanks so much for that. And Andreas, I suspect you agree with most of that. A lot of issues have been raised about artificial intelligence, who controls it, what data does it access, where's it stored, and so on. And you said in your presentation, teachers need to be part of the writing of the algorithms. So is there transparency at the moment to make sure that people can understand how these technologies work and who's actually making them?
Yeah, once again, I think technology, artificial intelligence, this is not a magic power. And it is something that, will replace certain teaching functions. I think when it comes to the transmission of knowledge, clearly, this is where AI is actually maybe superior to humans. But, education is not a transactional business. It's always, as Rebecca just said, it's a human, it's a relational, it's a social, enterprise. And that is something that actually, I believe technology can elevate. It can free teachers from, the simple transmission of material, or from the marking of essays, or all of this. It can actually give them the time to spend time with the students, finding out, who those students are, who they want to become, how they can accompany them. But what the point is really that teachers need to be at the heart of the design of those technology tools. If you do not understand an algorithm, you're going to be soon the slave of that algorithm. That is unfortunately the reality, that those algorithms are very powerful. You do not spend effort understanding them, designing them. And actually, I've come across many AI-based applications that were designed by teachers, by groups of teachers, by research groups. So again, I think we need to free up time for teachers to actually reinvent the pedagogies that are appropriate in the AI age. And on the other side of the spectrum, become great data scientists, to understand, what those results really mean. What can we actually learn from student learning patterns? AI generates an amazing amount of insights about how different students learn differently. I mean, we were talking about equity, all of this, but this is the first moment that we really have the opportunity to understand how every student learns and find a personal answer to this. Students with special needs, students with, special dispositions to learning. And I think that is the opportunity that teachers have to really have and develop an entirely different relationship with individual learners.
Thank you for that, Andreas. Look, we're really low on time. John Bangs, I know you want to come in. What would you like to add?
Well, very, very briefly, actually, this is not anti-technology or pro-technology. Technology actually helped out schools during COVID, and actually is helping out whole societies during times of war, nowhere more than so than Ukraine, actually. And both teacher organizations and government have actually kept the show on the road in terms of education through technology and remote learning. The issue is, as Andreas says, is are teachers and their organization and the profession at the table when it comes to designing systems? That's the big issue. And that's something that governments themselves have to get hold of as well.
Thanks so much for that, John. Look, we've just got time for final points, a final thought from each of our guests. I'd be interested to know your vision for teaching and learning in, say, 5 years from now. Where do you want it to be and how should it get there? You've got about 30 seconds to tell us. Jennifer Hong, why don't we start with you? Good luck.
Well, briefly, I just want to go back to this point about teachers currently feeling valued. And that's a momentum that we need to capitalize on. So I hope that given all the work that this administration has done thus far, that we can build on that. We don't want to lose that. I think that is a huge advantage. I think teachers, you are valued, and we want to keep shaping our policy to support great educators and all students. So I'll stop
Andreas Schleiser, what's your vision for education 5 years from now?
Well, teachers are the engineers of tomorrow's world, tomorrow's society. And I do think really that they deserve everybody's respect. And that should be the most prestigious occupation that we have.
Thanks so much. John Bangs, your microphone.
Well, I think my vision is that actually in a number of countries, there's been a disturbing deprioritizing as education itself. It needs energy and it needs to be made a top priority. And the top priority has to be achieved by pulling school communities, the wider community, and teachers and their organizations together to actually understand and put together the fact that it's teachers and it's schools that are the basis of a stable and valued society.
Thanks so much for that, John. And the last word goes to the US National Teacher of the Year 2023. Rebecca Peterson, your vision for your school in Oklahoma 5 years from now. What would you like it to look like?
Yeah, I would love for our teachers to have more agency and autonomy. I would love for them to be able to go deep into a subject as opposed to feeling like they have to go a mile wide. I'd love to see grow your own programs and mentorship programs so teachers can move up without moving out of the classroom. Would love to see paid maternity, paternity leave, childcare for staff and faculty. I would love for a year-long teacher appreciation, but in this week of teacher appreciation, I want to say thank you to my colleagues and my friends. It is an honor to represent you. It's an honor to be a part of this profession.
Thanks so much, Rebecca, and to all our panelists. That is all we have time for. If you want to learn more about some of the things that have been discussed, then please go to the OECD website, click on topics, and then on education, and you can get to the education section of the OECD website. There's loads to see. You can also follow us on Twitter, search for OECD Education or OECD Edu Skills. Thanks to all our guests, thanks to the production team, to all of you who have joined our webinar, and for your questions. Apologies we didn't get through even half of them. Please do join us again for another webinar soon. I don't know the date, but they happen almost every week. See you next time.
Thank you. Bye.